how do we record these as journal entries? The journal entries are just when we're paying for things or when we incur a cost, we debit the inventory and then credit the payable. And then when we transfer items out, we're going to move this, we're moving raw materials inventory into work in process. So it's really just debit inventory, credit payable, right? That's like us establishing a payable for our inventory. And then here we're crediting raw materials inventory and debiting our work in process. Like we're moving raw materials into these processes. And then here we're moving our indirect materials into our factory overhead. I won't move these to the Google Sheet because I think they're straightforward. There's not any math behind it. Same with the journal entries for labor costs. If there's wages payable, we're going to credit them, right? Because wages payable are a liability and we move it into the inventory account. Any indirect labor is going to go into factory overhead. And then when we pay for the wages payable, we pay for it in cash, right? We debit the liability and then credit the cash, the asset. And then the flow of factory overhead, we are going to be doing crediting all of the crediting the prepaid insurance, crediting the utilities payable, the cash and accumulated depreciation. These are all factory overhead costs, and then we debit the factory overhead. And then as we apply the factory overhead, we credit the factory overhead account and we apply it to the inventory departments, either the roasting or blending department. So the simple carry away, or the simple thought behind all of this, is you're just going to be applying these costs to your inventory accounts. What are the costs we have? Direct material, direct labor, factory overhead. So you credit those types of accounts to debit your inventory. So here, the material costs, right? We're crediting the related costs to apply it to our raw materials inventory. For labor costs, we're crediting our payables and moving them to our materials inventory. And then in our factory overhead, we're crediting our different factory overhead accounts and moving them to our inventory, ultimately. Just the only piece to take away from here is that factory overhead is an estimate. So here they're estimating it as 120% of direct labor costs. But that'll change. So just make sure you keep track of that estimate. Again, that's because things like insurance and electricity, we really can't attribute those costs directly to any individual product. So we have to take a high level estimate on how to apply them. We also get those bills after the fact many times. So we have to make an estimate up front. We make estimates when there's a timing difference between when we need the information and when we actually receive it. Any questions? Okay. And how do we transfer across products across departments? It's just an inventory transfer. So here, when we're transferring from the roasting department to the blending department, we credit the roasting department's inventory and then we debit the blending department's inventory. Just a reclass. Remember on the financial statements, this isn't actually going to have any impact. Like we're just going to report inventory, work in process, beginning, and finished goods. We're not going to talk about departments on the financial statements. This is just for internal management purposes. Finished good inventory and work in process inventory. So we're saying here we're transferring work in process to finished goods, and then we're transferring here a portion of finished goods to cost of goods sold. Whatever we sold, the cost related to those winds up being cost of goods sold, like in Accounting 101. These are trends in process operation. We're seeing these trends. I know these are just bubbles. It's not the best slide. This is a lot more interesting than you'd think. Like the fact that we have process operations nowadays, like the thought of Amazon. Who here uses Amazon? You can raise your hand or give me a thumbs up. there's one or two people. I'm pretty sure almost everybody uses something like Amazon, right? That Amazon Prime delivery is great. A lot of these companies are using automation and continuous processing to bring costs down and get products to your door as quickly as possible. That's the trend of getting your product to your door. That's a customer orientation. This is something that's only happened in the last 5 years. It's a complete change of how business is done. Even groceries can be shipped to your door now. That changes the value to the consumer. And it's all part of process. How do we streamline that? How do we make things like Uber Eats and Uber, who are more customized services, how do we make them more like processes to increase the yield, to increase the time when we get the product for it to be fresh? Like grocery production is very interesting. How do you make sure you get the groceries you want fresh to your door from the farm as quickly as possible? Or like the issue with cars right now, how do we make sure we can build enough RAV4 cars or Toyotas to meet consumer demand without storing a bunch of cars in some warehouse somewhere? And so these are complex questions we have. And the better we get at them, it's not some just accounting problem. The better we get at them, the better the quality of life improves for all of humanity. Right? Like it's a big solution for something that seems so minor. But like if you figure out a way to cut the cost of production for cars by 50%, suddenly almost everyone can get a car. And that's what happened with Ford, right? When they made the Model T, and suddenly everyone went from having horses to cars. You can still do that today with accounting. You figure out processes, this process operation, figure out where to cut costs, and suddenly you can add a lot of value to everyone's life. I'm gonna give everyone an option here. Do you want to take a quick break and then think about questions? Or do you want to go through the next 10 slides and then leave the last half of the class for class questions?
I vote for the break. My brain is fried.
Okay.
Yeah, same.
Okay, let's take a break until 10:15. Is that okay? And then we'll continue. Okay,
Yeah,
great.
sure, sounds good.
Awesome. Okay, see y'all soon. So let's explain and illustrate a hybrid costing system. Which the main question here is, what happens if things don't fit into the mold of a process costing system or a job costing system? The important takeaway here is that in this ever-evolving world, a lot of things aren't going to fit into systems, and these are just examples that we're using of frameworks that work for certain business types. You're going to sometimes be required, especially as you move up in your education, your profession, to make up your own systems. This is just supposed to give you some examples so you can have a framework to build your own system in the future. I regularly have people ask me questions on how they can develop a model for something bespoke, meaning something that's never happened before. And using these frameworks, you can have a starting point and then kind of combine both. So that's all this is saying, is sometimes you need to combine both, and you might need new systems or to customize processes.